the spec around market structures. So I'm pretty confident you're all happy with allocative, productive and dynamic efficiency and how the different market structures could show that, but I don't think we've went through exit efficiency enough in terms of it links into average costs. So sometimes it's seen as a lack of productive efficiency, but it's not as straightforward as just not being at the lowest average cost. So being at this point isn't productive efficient, and being at that point is, but it's a little bit more than that in terms of not operating at the lowest average cost. So the definition is not operating at the lowest cost. But I'll just show you a graph that might explain this a bit differently. So the graph that we've got in terms of economies and diseconomies of scale for average costs, economies of scale leading up to the productive efficient point and diseconomies of scale after. But even at that quantity, you could be X inefficient if your average cost was up here, or if your average cost was up here, or if your average cost was up here. So it's kind of an average cost curve which is parallel but higher than the average cost curve it could be. It's normally linked to a monopoly in terms of monopolies having a lack of competition and then not having the incentive to reduce their costs. And then this makes the kind of the usual monopoly with its welfare loss, so the kind of loss to the consumer, but also the benefit of supernormal profits can be reduced. So for example, if the average cost curve was higher, so we had X inefficiency in this market as well, so the average cost was higher, then what you'd end up with is a profit level which would be smaller than it would have been previously. You'd still have the same welfare loss in terms of allocative efficient would still be at that point, but the higher average costs wouldn't lead to a smaller profit. So one of the ways you could use this is potentially to link it into dynamic efficiency. And if you wanted to argue why a monopoly is unlikely to be dynamically efficient, is that if they are also X inefficient and their costs are higher than they could be, then the retained profits would be small, and it would be unlikely that that would lead to the dynamic efficiency gains that the market could. The other part of the spec around market structures I thought might just need a bit of clarity. One of the sections says calculate the N firm concentration ratios and their significance. The most likely would be a 4 or a 5 firm concentration ratio. If it doesn't state 4 or 5 and you've got time, do both. Likely to be 4, but just depends on the question, and also kind of types of price competition. So a price war is likely to be in an oligopoly market, so that's when firms go into a dominant strategy. Predatory pricing to force firms out, and limit pricing as a barrier to entry to keep firms from entering the market in the first place. And then you've got the types of non-price competition, branding, advertising, and so on. So if we have a quick look at it just as an example of market shares, you've got the UK energy market in 2009 and you've got the UK energy market in 2015. In this case we'll do 4 and 5 and we'll see how it changes. Just be careful when you're looking at the biggest market shares, there may be one that says others, and that will be lots of small firms added up. So that 19, even though it looks like the biggest market share, isn't a market share. And sometimes as well it looks like you just work your way around the pie chart. But if you notice on the one on the right hand side, SSE, which is one of the largest at 14%, isn't in that order, so you might miss that if you're just working around the 4. So just have a quick look around the whole pie chart, make sure that you're adding together the biggest firms. So we'll add British Gas, E.ON, SSE and npower for the 4 firm, and then as Scottish Power and EDF both have 10%, we'll just add one of those as well for the 5 firm. So if my maths is correct, I think we've got 61% for the 4 firm, and then we add the 10%, 71 for the 5 firm, and then over time we then end up with a 70% market share when we add British Gas, EDF, SSE and E.ON, and then again add one of the others to give us 80%. So what we can see is that over time the market is becoming more concentrated. So one way to talk about it is in terms of concentration, and if it is getting a larger market share, it's more concentrated. So more concentration is the same as less competition, and vice versa. More competition is less concentrated market, and in both of the ratios you've got a more concentrated market over time. The relevance of this to a question might be what this would mean. So this would mean maybe a stronger oligopoly, or more likely collusion within an oligopoly. You could justify that both market structures are oligopolies because both the 4 firms are over 40 and both the 5 firms are over 50. And potentially you could argue that British Gas now may be starting to exert market dominance as they have over 25%, which is also the definition for a monopoly. Also within the monopoly section, you have a little section at the bottom here which mentions natural monopoly. You don't need this graph, but I'm just going to show you a graph to help explain what's going on, to analyse what a natural monopoly is. So the usual monopoly graph we've got here on the left, you've got your welfare loss, you've got the supernormal profit, it's operating at profit max. The argument for a natural monopoly is that the business has such large economies of scale that it would be inefficient for it not to be just one firm. So if there was many firms or even a few firms in the market, if it was a monopoly and some competitors, then it would be inefficient because they would never achieve economies of scale. Now what that means is if the economies of scales are huge, that average total cost curve becomes significantly large and the marginal cost becomes significantly large as well. So what you have on the right is a version of this graph which just kind of chops that part of the graph off, so you don't see this part over here which is productively efficient. So what you've got is a falling long run average cost, you've got the marginal cost underneath that. They still profit maximize, so the difference there, you still have the profit. However, the allocative efficient point over here is a loss making point. So if the natural monopoly was to operate at allocative efficiency, it would make a loss, and the productive efficient point is even further over there. So the market, a natural monopoly without subsidy from the government is unlikely to be allocatively or productively efficient. So it can be allocatively efficient, and what that would equal would be the subsidy. Now if you don't remember this graph or it's new, don't worry, don't memorize it. It's just explaining that because this kind of also uses a justification for something being nationalised or in the public sector, because if it is in the private sector, it's likely to be at the profit maximising position, and it would be underprovided, or it's an argument for heavily regulating and subsidising. An example of here is the railways in the UK at the moment. They are heavily regulated, but they're also subsidised through money from the government to allow them to provide greater quantity of service than they might do if it was just left alone to the free market. The other one that we came across was contestability. The features of contestability are that there are 0 barriers to entry and exit. So barriers to entry and exit are key to this. sunk costs being one of the most significant in terms of a barrier to exit, which will keep a business inside a market. The implication for it in terms of behaviour is if there are zero barriers to entry and exit, that the firms behave like they are in perfect competition if the market was 100% contestable. So that would mean that there would be normal profits, and if it was 100% contestable, they would be operating at the sales maximising output, which would mean average costs equal average revenue, and there would be zero profits made there. An increase in contestability, so from say 0% where there's a monopoly down towards that 100%, would get closer to allocative efficiency, so making the market more contestable, especially in a monopoly or oligopoly, should equal a more productively efficient and allocatively efficient business. The way you would use this in an exam is to evaluate the questions around to what extent is a monopoly good, and you can say it depends upon contestability. If there are zero barriers to entry or exit, then you're going to get a more efficient market. So you get the benefits of a monopoly and you minimize the costs.